So as we think about aging, one, it's an opportunity because it's something we can see coming for a very long time, right? It's not a surprise. COVID, I think, threw a wrench in things and kind of changed the impacts of aging for a big chunk of the population. However, generally, if you're born, you do get to continue to age if you have a healthy life, and so you can see this coming, right? Like it's not it's not a sneak attack. So this is just median household income by age of householder. So this is go read the footnotes. But there could be a 30-year-old living with a 69-year-old, and the 69-year-old owns the home. So that's whose information is going to kind of set the bar here. But you can see kind of tied in with that decreased labor force participation rate, incomes go down once you have an older householder. And then again, looking at poverty levels, if we look at men and women or male and female, you see some differences. And I think this is one where it is interesting that the women have higher poverty rates as they're older than the men. And then this one I think is really interesting. So statewide, we've seen an increase in people living alone, single person households. And you definitely see that here in the 65 and older population. So that medium gray, we have a lot of grays on this chart, but the medium gray at the bottom is people living alone in that 65 and over age range. It's interesting that part of this big increase has been in that 65 or older population. It's not just, young kids starting their lives out and getting an apartment alone. It's a difference there.
We have about 90,000 households in Salt Lake County, and about 19% are renters. Majority are homeowners, as Mallory stated. Where do these people live? Okay, if we look at this gray bars, those are owners. About 35% have been in their house, 1990 or before. So you think about the appreciation, the equity, right? These homeowners have benefited from the run-up of two real estate cycles, and if we go down the years more and more, right? But all that's to say is baby boomers overall have a lot of equity for those that are homeowners. But if we look at renters, okay, so if we think about the 17,000 renters that are 65 plus in Salt Lake County, go all the way down to the bottom. 40% are recent renters. They became renters within the last couple of years. So this is just a chart for the whole state. 92%, basically 9 out of 10 renters cannot afford the median priced home right now. So when we look at cost burden for seniors, so this is all across the U.S. from the Harvard Joint Center. You look at Utah there, roughly 38% in the Salt Lake metro area, seniors are cost burdened. So if we look at, a good chunk of seniors have their house owned outright, so their cost burdens are relatively low. Their mortgage is paid off. All they have to look at really is their property tax. So, pretty much the whole state, our cost burden for those who own their house outright is, between 10 to 19%. Okay, if we look at those with the mortgage, it jumps up to about 45%. Okay, then if we look at renters, and remember from earlier, there was that chart of new renters. So senior renters, they have a higher share of cost burden. So in Salt Lake metro area, it's about 55% of renters are cost burden, where, just overall renters is about 45%. So we are seeing, this cost burden affect seniors more than the rest of the population in general.
There is little doubt that climate change is real, it's here, and it's really changing the way not just our communities function, but how we live our daily lives. In the U.S. and across the world, people now endure summers that are characterized by code red air quality days and winters by either too much or too little snowpack. Extreme heat and cold are becoming more common throughout the U.S. and across the world. Hurricanes are increasingly frequent, intense, and deadly, as we saw last week with Helene. Extreme rainfall and toxic air, wildfire smoke now plague parts of the country that are unaccustomed to such conditions. We see clear evidence of the impacts that climate change leaves behind in the destruction in its wake. Here in the U.S., NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, tracks disasters, nearly all of which are climate-fueled, that results in at least $1 billion of damage. The number of these billion-dollar disasters has increased each year since NOAA started tracking, which is in 1980. On average, there have been about 8 events per year. In 2022, there were 18. Last year, there was a record high of 28. They were still counting this year, obviously, and potentially on track to best that record. These disasters include the full array of wildfires, storms, flooding, hurricanes, cold waves, and droughts, and reach nearly all corners of our country. Time and time again, we see that events of this scale lead to the loss of life and the devastation of homes and communities that will take years to recover from. This climate trend intersects with and compounds another one that's less talked about and maybe less apparent, which will nevertheless have a tremendous impact on our communities. As you've heard from our prior speakers, we are, as a country, certainly here in Utah and around the world, growing older. People over 65 are the fastest growing demographic. This is the first year of what's called Peak 65, with 4 million people turning 65 every year now through 2027. 100 years ago, 1 in 20 people was over 65 in the U.S. Today, roughly 1 in 6 is. And a similar trend, albeit on a very different timeline here in Utah, as we just heard, is underway. Whereas about 8% of the population in 1980 was over 65, that's around 12% today, and by 2060 will represent 20% of the population. Looking at communities as a whole, places that fail to prioritize older adults' needs or even account for them are not likely to be places where older adults can age well and thrive. Instead, our failure to provide effective and affordable housing, transportation, and public spaces can lead to isolation and loneliness, declines in health, and financial vulnerability. And all of these realities have the potential to be further amplified by climate risks. I would argue that nowhere, really, are the consequences of our failure to plan for the needs of older adults more apparent than when you think about the impacts of climate change and climate-fueled disasters. Among the largest named disasters, we see time and time again that older adults bear the brunt. The reality is that climate change is already contributing to changes in older adults' health and financial well-being in ways that differentiate them from other age groups, especially when you consider how that intersects with risk exposure. Let's focus first on financial well-being. We've heard before about housing. I think we could all agree that housing is fundamental. Housing stability and affordability is the foundation of health, well-being, and safety, so it merits some special focus.
Yeah, aging in place is something that most people want. But it's broader than just saying, I want to live in my house forever. People want to be able to live in their neighborhoods where they're connected. Aging in place is broader than just thinking about, is my home adequate for my needs? But it also does include that. We're working right now with USDA on, I think, hopefully a really exciting project going out into rural communities to be able to help people age in place by doing some home modifications. USDA has a lot of money. USDA is the Department of Agriculture. They have a lot of money that they can use for those kinds of projects. And everything that we can do to help people stay in their homes rather than having to go into an institutional setting, that definitely saves a lot of money because it's extremely expensive to go into an assisted living facility or a skilled nursing facility.
And so how do we build that better? How do we adjust what we're doing planning wise to accommodate that as we bring more supply to the market and allow hopefully for that aging in place, but just to bring it in, do we look at smaller lots? Do we look at connected homes? Do we struggle right now to build condos. The financing for them isn't available. And so we're looking at single family homes that are either very, very close together or attached, that are still attached at the garage, and you get 4 homes up against each other. And we've developed several communities that way that they function beautifully. But we're still talking about getting affordable. And in today's environment, new construction just isn't going to be. it is almost impossible to build what one would consider an affordable income level house.
So why do age-friendly places matter? You probably have seen this, but the sort of transformation from the pyramid to the pagoda, right? And kind of beginning to think about the change that will happen at a really massive scale. I think one of the questions is then, how do we link what we know between research and what we see in our communities, as well as with the design of places that impact people's daily lives? And also, how do we begin to define what those environments might benefit from moving forward? So what I'd like to share with you this afternoon are just 3 different participatory research action methods which are aimed at co-creating knowledge of age-friendly spaces. I really like this quote, and I usually don't read from my slides, but this comes from a researcher in Denmark, and I think it's really important to just articulate this premise, which is stated: instead of conceiving older people as a social problem or burden, new discourse constructs aging as a positive process and emphasizes the active roles older people continue to play in society. So really thinking about aging in place as not being confined at all to house and home, or even house, home, and neighborhood, but really thinking about it in multiple scales, and how that in some ways mirrors that ecosystem idea, right? That there is sort of a connectivity and a cohesivity to the supports, and that while different place types will have different requirements and different audiences and different things that advance healthy aging across the lifespan, they also support each other. And I think the more that our research can begin to underscore these, and then the more that it promotes dialogue across disciplines and across sectors, sort of the better chance we have at defining really good questions as we move forward in our work.